Lesson 41, Was Jesus Political? Part 2. We've already looked at the triumphal entry, which took place on Sunday morning. These events are Monday morning. And Jesus is a little bit hungry. They've spent the night in Bethany, and now they're coming over the Mount of Olives, overlooking Jerusalem, and he sees a fig tree. Now, it's too early for figs to be ripe, but not too early for them to have buds. They're little green nodules. Were they edible? Yes. Were they delicious? No. But Jesus walks up to the fig tree and there's no nodules. So it will never have figs. And he cursed the fig tree. Seems like a mean thing to do, but look, it was a fig tree whose purpose was to produce figs, and it wasn't, and it never would. It's using up space on God's green earth. Jesus curses it. And some people say, well, what a mean thing to do. No, it's not about the fig tree. And if you look at Mark carefully, what you have here is a literary sandwich. We've seen it before. The top bread is the fig tree. The bottom bread is the fig tree. Again, he shows us that it took 24 hours before the disciples realized that the fig tree was actually dead. In between the bread is the meat that flavors the bread on either side. And what's that? It's what we call the cleansing of the temple, what I prefer to call the cursing of the temple. Because Jesus is not cleansing it, he is cursing it. He is saying, if you do not change, if you don't repent, this whole place will be destroyed. Let's read this story. And seeing in the distance a fig tree and leaf, he went to see if he could find anything on it. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. And he said to it, may no one ever eat fruit from you again. And they came to Jerusalem, and he entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold and those who bought in the temple. And he overturned tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. The Temple Mount is a large space, as large as nearly 40 football fields put together. So when Jesus disrupted the economics of the temple, it wasn't like all the money changers. It wasn't all over. It was an isolated space, enough to get the attention of the Jewish leaders for sure. Enough to get the attention of the Roman centurions for sure. Their fortress was on the northwest corner of the temple, and they would overlook the affairs as a peacekeeping force. So what Jesus does is more symbolic than economically detrimental. It was a moment that spoke volumes. And what he said in this moment was really quite stunning. Listen. And he was teaching them, saying to them, is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations, but you have made it a den of robbers. He's quoting two passages in one verse. The first is Isaiah 56, verse 7. The second, Jeremiah 7:11. Now, when he quotes a single verse, the people know the Bible well enough to think through the rest of what was said. So, for example, if I say, I pledge allegiance, you've already said in your mind, to the flag. If I say Humpty Dumpty, you say he sat on a wall. I don't have to quote the whole thing for the whole message to be sucked into the vortex of this single statement. And Jesus is combining two of the most powerful protests of the Old Testament against the temple of God. In Isaiah, he's saying, if you don't repent, if you just keep doing your religious duties to build yourself up, but you don't have true fast, a true heart, especially for people who are far from God, God's going to destroy this place. And that's exactly what Jeremiah says in Jeremiah 7:11, and on this very plot of ground. Jeremiah's protest, 700 years earlier, predicted the destruction of the temple. And the people replied, God won't destroy the temple. In fact, they repeated it 3 times. It's the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. They're so confident that God will protect this place that it doesn't matter what they do in this place. And Jesus, reliving the life of Jeremiah in this moment, says, God will destroy this temple. And that threat will be repeated, not in the kind of symbolic action of Monday morning. But in a very long narrative on Tuesday afternoon, you can read it all in Matthew 24, Luke 19, Mark 13. It is a powerful prediction that came true to the letter in 70 AD. There's a lesson in that for us today. That if we who have power in the church use it for our own self-aggrandizement rather than the benefit of people who are farthest from God, there will be punishment for misrepresenting, for mismanaging the privilege that God has given to us. We have an obligation to not be a fruitless fig tree.